Hi, everybody. So, welcome to the next episode of the Azure On Air podcast. We're at the Integrate Summit again, and I'm really pleased to invite my really good friend Kent Weare, who's from Microsoft. Kent leads the Logic App team. Kent's going to talk to us about some of the things he's been talking about this week at Integrate. So, thanks for joining us, Kent.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, assuming we've got some people who may not have come across you in this space before, we've got a lot of new people at Integrate. Just tell us a little bit about your journey with Microsoft.
Sure. So I joined Microsoft 2017. I initially joined the Power Platform group. At the time, there's a product called Microsoft Flow, now known as Power Automate. So I started there. But my journey into Microsoft was largely related to my background in integration, spending a lot of time with BizTalk and the integration portfolio.
It's great to have people in the Logic App team who have a strong BizTalk background. Yeah. That's so important.
Yeah, so I spent about 3 years. 3 years over on the Power Platform side, predominantly Power Automate, and then also Power Virtual Agents. And so that kind of got me a little bit into sort of the AI side of things with Power Virtual Agents. And then even while I was working with the Power Automate team, I also focused on RPA, robotic process automation. So those were sort of two areas that I think have really sort of helped me recently in terms of how we're dealing with some of these new investments. But I have been on the Logic Apps team for just over 2 years, probably about 2.5 years upcoming. So, happy to be back in the integration space.
So that really prompted actually what I was thinking would be my first question about that transition from Power Platform and RPA. To me, when I see you talk about Logic Apps, I really recognize the experience you picked up there, bringing some of the stuff you learned into the integration space, because it's about creating visibility of integration, isn't it? And I think there's a lot of overlaps. What do you feel are the things that have helped you be successful in Logic Apps?
So I think one of the biggest things I picked up on being on the Power Platform was this role of democratization. And this idea that bringing more people to building the solution actually drives more impact.
Yeah.
And so that's something where I know as technical people, we love to solve hard problems, but hard problems don't always have to be hard to solve. And I feel like the more you can democratize, the lower the barrier of entry there is, the more successful people will be and organizations will be. And I think at the end of the day, that's the biggest outcome.
Yeah.
And that's what I've really tried to do is like, hey, how can we keep this simple? How can we make this approachable for more people? Because if there's more people integrating systems, that means there's more productivity, there's more outcomes for customers. I think that's the biggest learning that I've taken from that side of the organization.
That needs to be the next Logic App t-shirt, doesn't it? Hard problems don't have to be.
There we go. I love it. Yeah.
That's next year.
Let me go update my slide deck here.
So how have you found Integrate this week? Then what things have excited you here? Not just about the things that you're announcing, but conversations you've had with people.
A lot of things. So we talked yesterday on day one about hybrid integration. I think that's just a reality where customers still have some on-premises needs to execute their integrations. That's obviously interesting. Today, I'm going to be talking about AI. A lot of conversations yesterday in the hallway about that. So I'm really excited to talk about this session as well. And the other thing I'm excited about, which isn't directly in my area, but is some of the fabric stuff that the messaging team talked about. Like I look back at my history prior to joining Microsoft in the energy industry, and dealing with those types of solutions were very difficult to go ahead and solve.
Yeah.
And now like the platform that they've created is kind of interesting. So, even I've reached out to Jason, an old colleague who you also know, and said, hey, you really need to look at this fabric stuff because it's really interesting. So those are some of the things that, got my interest here this week.
So I think that touches on a really interesting point for me actually is because, Logic Apps in your area is an integration area, but actually understanding the relationships between the other Microsoft products is really a key to being successful, isn't it? And kind of promoting, because I think AI is exactly the same. It's like, if I'm building an AI solution, why should I care about Logic Apps? If I'm building a Fabric solution, why should I care about Logic Apps? What's your thoughts on those?
It's one of those things where you think, okay, you work at Microsoft, you get to see Microsoft tech all day long, every day, and it doesn't always happen. Like you kind of get your blinders on a little bit when you're going ahead and focusing on a specific feature, and you basically have a little bit of tunnel vision. So it is really great to come to these types of events and see the integration portfolio being represented and being able to learn. I just sat through the service bus or the Azure messaging session with Clemens and Christina, and they were talking about Service Bus DR, and I was sitting beside Kevin Lamb, and I'm like, hey, like, when is this coming out? And he's like, oh, it's next week. And I'm like, ooh, that's great, because that actually helps me with my story about business continuity and disaster recovery when it comes to logic apps and integration, because, hey, if I've got my messaging sorted out, that gives me more options in terms of like active, passive architectures and things like that. So yeah, it's important. And that's the benefit of coming to these types of sessions, even for us internally, where we can get together and see what the other teams are working on and making sure like that we understand those offerings. So collectively, we can bring the offering forward to our customers.
So we touch on the generative AI bit a bit. So we had another podcast this week with Andre from the APIM team.
Okay.
And he talked to us about some of the investments there, and particularly about customer scenarios, about APIM can expose and generative AI solution to help you integrate it into an application. What about logic apps? Where do you think logic apps can help a customers building AI solutions?
Okay, so I'm really excited about this. So there's kind of like, I call it, so there's actually 3 areas. Let's call it 3 areas. But I think to our strategy, back to our strategy, there's kind of 2 sides to it. Number one is, how can our developers be more productive using generative AI? And what I mean, our developers are customers, right? So how can we infuse AI in our experiences to reduce the time it takes to build a solution? So that's sort of, strategy number one. Then the next part is, how can customers go ahead and use our technology to build generative AI applications? And I think this is something that will really resonate with you. I think a lot of people feel like, hey, I need to do this generative AI thing and it needs to be brand new, and that AI needs to be in the center of the application. And I don't think that's always the case. And this is going to be a big part of my talk. If you think about the nature of integration and even pub sub, there's this opportunity where you have existing interfaces in place. You're already integrating data. Now, your customers have figured out that this is valuable data because it's worth sharing with other systems. So that's kind of your first clue. It's like, maybe I've got some interesting things here. Then it's more of like, hey, how can I actually go ahead and subscribe to these important data feeds and actually publish that into an LLM through like a RAG pattern, right? And so we've released connectors for Azure OpenAI and also Azure AI Search that helps you implement the RAG pattern. And it's something that you can do quite quickly. Like, we provide a GitHub sample, modify some of the connections. Next thing you know, like, you're ingesting data into an LLM. Now, the other sample we provide is now how do you search or retrieve data from the LLM? And so this is what's going to come up in my demo, where I'm actually extending the demo I had yesterday, which is a customer service power outage situation. And this is kind of this core integration, has no AI at all, right? Now what I'm able to do is basically subscribe to the work order completion messages and actually start to pump those into the LLM. Now what I can do is expose that LLM to my business users so they can actually gain insights by querying that data store. Now, if you think about historically what has happened, like, we've got 4 different systems in the mix, right? So how would you go ahead and reason across those 4 systems? You typically end up in some sort of ETL or ELT, data warehousing solution, which becomes expansive, but it becomes rigid, right? You have to know exactly what you're going to go look for. That's the beauty of LLM, right? Whereas like, it's actually free form in the sense that I can go ahead and have a different query today than I did yesterday based upon what's top of mind for me. So that's, in a nutshell, like, where I kind of see this is like, hey, how do we sort of bring more of those LLM applications to integration? Because I think they complement each other pretty well. The other thing about LLMs is that they're really good when dealing with like historical data or point in time data. This is what happened when that work order took place. But what happens when the data is not in the LLM yet, right? This is where this notion of like plugins comes into play. We've recently announced some features with Azure OpenAI and what they call this assistance feature, where they have function calling. What we allow you to do is to wire up a logic app that can go ahead and be called from that LLM. Now, this, in conjunction with our large connector library, really allows you to get access to real-time information. And the flip side of it also is that when you have an LLM and you're asking it essentially for guidance or recommendations, it kind of assigns you work. Hey, Mike, I've got this question. Okay, do steps 1 through 5. But what if you can now go ahead and automate some or all of those steps, right? And I really look at it as automating the last mile. And once again, you can do that through plugins where it's like, hey, I need to do these steps. Well, hey, can you just do it for me? Okay, sure. Boom. I'll call this workflow, use connectors, and then basically finish that off. So that's the other part of this that I think is pretty exciting.
I think listening to you talk about that, I think for me, it's great to see you get so excited about it, because I really see you viewing integration and logic apps as being like a massive accelerator for a customer's AI journey. And I think even right at the start, one of the first things you said was, I feel customers kind of know there's a technology solution out there that can help them, but they don't know where to start and what the problem really is. But integration's really, it's almost like the trigger point, isn't it, of, I'm integrating data between here and here. Actually, that has a value. There's the opportunity to create my AI use case. And by the way, here's all the logic app components can help you do it. I think that's a really good way of getting people onboarded with taking up AI solutions. Is that really what you wanted to get across?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's kind of interesting is that, historically, in some circles, right, this notion of middleware has this bad connotation because you're getting in the way, right? But now it's an advantage, right? If you think about all of the data feeds that are moving through your iPaaS or your middleware platform, this is your central nervous system, right?
Yeah.
And so if you think about like how that now applies to AI, wow, like that's where you need to look. Like even yesterday in the hallway, someone's like, you know what, I see this AI, I hear all about it, but it's like, I just don't know what my use case is. And I'm like, it's right under your nose. Go back, look at your registry of interfaces, go look at, your group hub or whatever, your application list. It's right there. Then figure out what is like the most valuable transactions here and what are the challenges that the business struggles by not being able to reason over that data or the collection of that data. And that's sort of where you should start to look.
I guess really there's also a huge opportunity here, isn't there? Because if we take a step back to BizTalk migration for a minute, which is a common theme in this conference at the minute, you've obviously got all these BizTalk customers moving to AIS, but actually there's going to be opportunities for them to open up those use cases in the future off the back of the migration. So maybe one of my thoughts is there specific design patterns that you think customers could leverage? Because obviously if you do very broken point-to-point type integrations, it might make it difficult to make that data available because it's it's just in the run history. But I'm thinking when you mentioned service bus, this is really where I join the dots between the AIS components to create the patterns to help me do AI in the future. What kind of things do you think would come into play there?
Yeah, well, I think naturally like pub sub is sort of the initial one. That's the sort of the simplest one. I think it speaks to like leveraging that architecture pattern because you're right. Like if you do have a lot of point to point, now you need to go to inject yourself in the middle of all of these different workflows. And naturally you can do that, but it won't be the most productive or sort of cleanest way to solve that problem. But if you think the nature of pub sub, then naturally that's sort of the easiest one. I think the other one that's kind of interesting, and this is a little bit more in that fabric space that we talked about before, but streaming, right? Like the ability to reason over data as it's being streamed gets pretty interesting. And that's kind of a part of, Kevin and his talk yesterday where they talk a little bit about the back end of streaming and to be able to do like time-weighted averaging. So I think that's another integration related thing, even though it's not so much a logic apps thing.
I think when I listen to your strategy there, really, you mentioned Jason before, and I think about the work we did back then, and we put this particular design pattern actually, which I think at the time we were, a little bit feature planning, but we did this bit where we had anything on service bus, we could put it, so step one was we always send to a topic and receive from a forwarded subscription, but it meant that any topic we could add a new rule to send it through to an event hub from a service bus via a function that then captured into a data lake. And the idea was we could always then build something on top of it, which at the time was we were building a Synapse solution. But I guess in that pattern, it's a real accelerator to build an AI solution on top of that, which I guess that would probably be the kind of pattern customers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's probably, I think it'll be interesting to see where LLMs go, because I'm not necessarily positioning this as your Uber sort of, data mart or your data solution, but your analytics solution. But I think it is kind of interesting, the nature of the free form, where like, historically everything's very rigid in terms of like what it needs to be defined. And, the whole ETL is all about sort of getting into a common sort of funnel. But what if you've missed something? That's the interesting about LLM. And I'm going to show that in my demo where it's like, like, hey, I didn't instruct the LLM to do any of this stuff, right? And now I can just free form query on top of this. So it is quite powerful from that perspective. So
I guess like known conversations we've had in the past, I think one of the things you're a huge fan of though is the ability to kind of experiment with velocity to find the value. And then even if you decide at that point to say, right, now we invest some money and build a more structured solution for it, we know that it works. And that kind of, a few years ago, you mentioned at the keynote about wanting customers to deliver quickly and fail fast. It's really an important part of the strategy. And it feels like that's just as applicable here, isn't it?
And I think it has to be, right? Like, I think everything is changing so quickly with generative AI. And I think it's one of those things where you should explore. And I think I always think of like, what's sort of the amount of time you spend to get to that point.
Yeah.
And this is legitimately one of those things where you could spend a few hours and have like the light bulb moment. Like even myself, I had the light bulb moment a few weeks ago when we were working on a demo for Build. And I'm like, you know what, like this just makes sense. And it was kind of there were some ground rules about this particular demo where one of our VPs was talking about app modernization and how you can enrich sort of apps with AI. And really, by having these ground rules of not actually touching the core application, but being able to inject AI into it and being able to do that through logic apps was the real light bulb moment for me, where it's like, wait a minute, right? We're now complementing existing solutions, whether it's built on our technology or even another, company's tech or another stack's technology. And now we're sort of complementing this with AI and with logic apps and doing it in a low code manner. Because I think that's the other piece here. People go, I didn't think about logic apps being an AI in generative AI solutions. And, I kind of look at it from a similar mindset, is like the same reasons we want to use low code for integration is no different than low code for AI, right? And I think, Slav in the keynote yesterday showed a GitHub repo, and it showed like tens of thousands of lines of like Python code to accomplish what you can do in, I think it was like 10 different actions in logic apps. And so same idea, like, being able to do low code, democratize who can go ahead and do this, build it quickly, experiment, and you will have a light bulb moment.
You'll change it, won't you? I mean, it's going to change and it's going to need to be maintained. So that, again, that's the low code.
Well, and I think even we've discovered that when we work with our partners like Azure OpenAI and Azure AI Search, where, we've implemented this in these workflows and said, but here's a few extra steps, like where we need to tokenize the document using some Python code. So we tell you to provision a function to go do that. Now, in working with these teams, they're like, hey, well, like we can now just build that as part of the core offering. And so we're even going to be able to remove or reduce the number of like those steps from 10 to probably 6, because we've actually learned by working with customers on this too, of saying like, hey, anything that requires customers to do this implementation piece over and over, like let's embed that in the product. And I think it's only going to like collapse the time that it takes to build these things.
Last question I'd like to ask you about. So one of the things I'm enjoying this year at Integrate for me is, if I think back to last year, AI was really something people were just starting to touch on. And I remember we did that little muck around demo in the breakout area where Sandra and I were fiddling around with ChatGPT, and I think we generated maps for logic apps. And if you think at that point, nobody was really talking about AI in the integration space, and yet a year later, I think it's a year plus 1 week, and AI is like so fundamental to everything in the strategy now. And everybody's looking at how to use it. What do you think is going to be the thing we'll talk about at next Integrate Summit? That'll be the next theme or the next area.
It's an interesting question.
What would you like it to be as well?
Well, it's hard to predict, but I think there's something that that's really struck me a little bit here. And as you start to see even how these plugins work, the notion of like data transformation and schemas is very, very interesting in my mind. Like even in the demo I'm going to show today, it's almost like using LLMs. They're very good at understanding the structure of data without it being overly explicit. And it does beg the question of, when we build integration solutions, they are very rigid. They have to be very predictable, right? That's the whole, a developer wants a schema so they know they're working against this very typed, like strongly typed contract, so that you can predictably and reliably build data transformations that actually hit the end system. I don't know if this will be next year, like we're like, hey, it's done. But I feel like this notion of like the role of integration is going to be very different, how we build solutions. And this notion of like not everything always having to be such strongly typed will be very, very interesting. And I think naturally, like customers expect a lot of predictability around these things. Like if you're, processing a purchase order, you need to make sure all of the key fields are actually ingested properly. But I do feel over the next coming years, the way we build integrated solutions is going to be very different.
Do you think we'll get to the point? I mean, AI's today, it's very much, there's a bunch of data, go and tell me something interesting to answer my question. But do you think we'll get to the point where it'll be actionable? We'll say, there's the systems, go and integrate this order from CRM into something and it'll just do it for you. How far do you think we are from that?
To be honest, I don't think we're that far away. And I think it's because I think everything is so much prompt based. And it's one of those things where, definitely you can already start to see it a little bit with Power Automate. We're starting to work along these lines as well in terms of like, go ahead and build me a workflow based upon my conditions. And that's kind of, I'd say, step one, because you still need that human in the loop. That's the reason why we call it co-pilot, right? Not autopilot. So you still need that human to go ahead and validate these things. But it's still basically taking something unstructured and then making it very rigid for those same reasons. I need to make sure that all of the data lands in the right place. But as these solutions evolve, I think it almost could be like write a paragraph that says, go do this, this, and this. And it generates all of these artifacts under the hood for you. And maybe some of it isn't even an artifact. It just knows that those are the instructions. And what's interesting about prompts is you can kind of reinforce and give it boundaries, like don't do this. So as you do some testing and maybe it sort of hallucinates a little bit, you can say, don't do that. And it'll stay in its lane. And so I do feel like this notion of like prompt-based integration is definitely an area that will evolve. Like maybe not next year, but I'm sure the year after.
I look forward to seeing that.
Well, I think we'll see more of this. And I think it's an evolution, right? We're seeing it already in terms of designing solutions, but then you still sort of have these core artifacts. But I think then it's like, what's that next stage? As this becomes more and more reliable, probably that even reduces in terms of what you're actually like pre-creating versus having just core prompts that are sort of putting in the guardrails to build that for that solution to execute and run. But without a question, like democratization, I think AI is the next form of democratization. So I get pretty excited about this because I've seen what it can do from a low code perspective, but I feel like this is going to sort of take it to the next level and really make building these types of solutions even more approachable for even a broader audience. So, and I don't think people should like look at that as fear mongering, but I do feel that people need to understand where this is going. Like this is something where people, you may not believe in AI yet. I don't think it's a fad. It's for real. And it's one of those things where you continue to need to better understand it and find where it can be very productive for you. Because I think
it comes back to business value at the end of the day. It's what it all comes back to, isn't it?
It totally does. And if you think about, this notion of just the nuts and bolts, like that's not the value, it's the outcome that the nuts and bolts actually provide. So I would encourage people to continue to look at this, understand it, know its limitations, know its benefits, and really find how you could become more productive and how you can drive more value. Because if you don't, then I feel like you're kind of swimming upstream or you're running into the wind from that perspective.
I think that's a really good sort of point to end on there. Actually, that's what people need to be thinking about their learning paths moving forward, isn't it? So I think we're just about at time there. Thank you very much, Ken, for joining us. That was really an enjoyable conversation, actually, and I think it'll be interesting next year if we look back and see where we got to, considering how far we've come this year. We'll consider that.
Absolutely, because it's funny, even recently it was asked, like, what's the 5-year roadmap for Logic Apps? And it's kind of like, a year ago, these AI investments weren't even on the table, right? And so it's one of those things where when these truly ground-changing, trends emerge, like you do have to sort of pivot and shift, and we'll continue to do that. And, at the end of the day, it's like, how can we drive more value for customers? So
perfect. Thank you for joining us.